get started here. Thank you guys for joining us. I'm really excited. For years, I've been wanting to come to this event. I've known Mike for a couple of years. This week was always, I was in Chicago, so it was spring break for Illinois, and I was always away with the kids. I live in Florida now, so this is the first opportunity I had to come back, so I'm really excited. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about zero-day and zero-day events and attacks. And the theme we picked was the Mandalorian. So we're going to draw some parallels there. It's just a fun topic. Some of them might be a stretch, so again, bear with us. It's the first time that John and I are doing it together, so again, bear with us. But I think it's going to be fun. And if you guys have questions, feel free to raise your hand, interrupt, add to it. I think if we can make it interactive, totally open to that. So let's jump into it here. We'll do a quick intro, so maybe John, you can start.
Sure. John Hochevar. I'm an IT security manager at American Family Insurance. Been in the security industry for a little over 20 years, done a little bit of everything. I started in manufacturing, moved on to critical infrastructure, did a little sales and consulting, and now I'm in the insurance industry. I've known Anders for about 10 years through our shared passion around third-party cyber risk management. And for my own risk management, my participation in this presentation is in no way an endorsement of BitSite services or products. So, Anders.
Oh, all good, yeah. So I do work at BitSite now. I'll tell you the story. But so that's me. That was pre-starting a business. That's what I looked like. So if you want to know what it does to you to start a startup, that's a pretty good thing right there. So I started a company called Third Party Trust out of Chicago, but I'd like to say my second home was really Milwaukee, because I went through the generator accelerator very, very early. And really when I got so a lot of the funding I ended up getting was from right around here. Right, so Capital Midwest Fund is right, they led my first round, but even earlier than that, the generator and some other folks, and also a great customer base. So at some point, AmFam was a customer, Rockwell Automation. I met someone here from Northwestern Mutual. Their CTO I met through Generator. He told, very early, told the CISO for US Foods, you got to buy Anders' SHIT, which he did, so I got my first Fortune 100 customer. So again, I'm very grateful to Milwaukee and all the support that I got. So it took 7 years to build the business. We grew it to 120, 140 customers-ish. And we just sold it to BitSite about 7 months ago. That was kind of announced. So I have a lot of startup experience, that roller coaster. If you guys have questions or want to know more about it, I have a lot of good and not so good memories. And again, building something from scratch is incredibly painful, but at the end, it actually ended up being worth it. I don't know if there was a long way along the line. I just wasn't sure if it was, but at the end, it definitely was. I know the BitSite now. So BitSite, if you guys are familiar with, primarily it's they're known for their cyber rating. It's really doing outside-in scans. It does relate really closely to this topic, 0 days, and I'll kind of describe that as we go along. But the key, my job right now is I'm still building product. I'm still building tech. So I run my old solution, which is really around vendor risk management. But also, again, their continuous monitoring solutions. I'm bringing those two together. That's what I do on a day-to-day basis. So, okay. Also, I forgot to say that the Mandalorian way of saying hello is CypherCon, and it's a greeting, but it literally means glad to see that you're alive. And I joke with my friends down in Chicago because I'm pretty sure the way crime's going, very soon, that is what you're going to be saying to each other, man. I'm so glad you're still alive. So, first slide. What's the biggest data breach in history? There's a bit of a hint on the picture, but what do you think it was? Well, clearly it was not Target, it was not Equifax, it was not any of those. It was definitely the Death Star being blown up, right? And if you think about it, there's a whole movie that ended up happening called Rogue One that came later. It's not nearly as good as the early ones that I was sitting at the edge of my seat as a kid watching. But Rogue One was all about, again, how they stole the plans. And Episode 4, that's when they actually, it starts right after that, and that's when they beamed up the plans to, again, the diplomatic ship that was going to Enron or whatever that was. But anyway, if you think about it, so again, there was like the reconnaissance that happened. They stole the plans, and there they found a vulnerability. Again, it was like a port. They had, they created the delivery mechanism, which was like the torpedo that just went down. And then again, from there, it went horizontal, and then blowing up the whole thing. That's the iconic image of Death Star blowing up right there. But in some ways, again, this was an unpatched vulnerability on the Death Star that they took advantage of, and that was the end result. Okay? So, for CPE reasons, this is kind of the must-have, so you can kind of read that. But what are we going to learn here? Looking at maturity of cybersecurity, improving the detection and response around breaches, and then how do we mitigate them? So, learning objectives. So, for CPE reasons, we got it. All right. My inspiration is we're kind of thinking about this. Again, we always wanted to make it a little bit more interesting, a little bit more fun, relating to something. So the red zone there, those are the 6 tenets of the Mandalorian. So I'd imagine a lot of folks in here have watched The Mandalorian. I'm on season 3 now, I'm not going through it, but we are taking those and trying to relate it back best we can. The second piece is really the Verizon breach reports. I read that every single year. I would say it's required reading. The new one's going to come up pretty soon. It's the best resource I found that kind of gives me an idea of where's the market, the direction of the market, where are the key pain points or focus areas. And then Manny had a really good specific report around 0 days too. So you'll see some of those stats coming in through the presentation. But these are really the 3 key things that we're grounding a lot of information around and speaking to it. So, all right. So a couple of other 0 days, and actually the one that's worth mentioning that's not up here because we just got known on Wednesday. It's the 3CX. I don't know if you guys heard about it, but it's like a voice over IP solution. I guess 600,000 companies or so are using it, and it's got a known 0 day exploit right now. They haven't done the full forensics, but right now that exploit is in the wild, and their recommendation is actually that you uninstall the solution. But it's that's easier said than done. It's highly disruptive, but also. The thing is, voice over IP, it's going to be open to the internet. I mean, that's, again, you're calling. So again, for someone to be able to call into you, you're going to have to make it open to the internet. So again, it's highly available right now. So that's a 0 day. If you want to draw to a more recent one, that's one that you can think about. The other big ones that really shook the market though was really SolarWinds. So again, that's where they were able to get into the code repo. They were able to install some malicious code, and then that code then got deployed onto all the customer instances. And that's a good example of a supply chain attack. It's you only have to, if you can hack SolarWinds, you can actually, in extension, end up hacking a couple thousand customers. And once that's installed, then you can probe for that. You can then ransomware those companies. The other one was Log4j. And I'll ask in a second, how, again, at your companies, what the pain that you guys felt, but Log4j was it's a library that you install in your job applications for logging, right? And, in terms of its pervasiveness, I have a friend that runs library, code dependency and library analysis. He told me that 100% of the job applications that his customers had was using Log4j. So basically, if you're running a job application, which is very common, this vulnerability was there. And it's estimated, according to Manny, 44% of networks ended up actually getting probed for this. So not everyone has job applications, but they can see somebody's trying to hit these solutions. So again, they have that data. So that was, again, almost half of all corporate networks were getting probed for the Log4j issue. So again, it's a good example. Now, we'll talk a little bit more about the different steps, but that's how pervasive these things are. And again, one vulnerability can actually, like in today's day and age, like spread very, very fast, right? It could have like huge implications. Again, 3CX is just a recent example. So, John, I mean, tell me a little more about, again, did you live through either SolarWinds or Log4j or one of these other ones? And tell me how that was.
Yeah, across a couple of our organizations, certainly impacted by both from an exploration, but I think one of the biggest challenges was understanding what our exposure to each of these were. So, in a few slides, talk a little bit about some of your security best practices and how we're so dependent on other groups within the organization like IT. So if you want to know your exposure to Log4j, you have to have a pretty solid asset management program for a security group to be able to look for those vulnerabilities and guide the rest of the organization in remediation efforts. So yeah, certainly, these were prevalent in many of the organizations that I've worked at, and some of the best efforts are around how solid you were from an asset management perspective to be able to understand your exposure to some of these vulnerabilities.
Yeah, and we'll also talk more about like your supply chain. That's really where I've focused a lot of my time over the last 7+ years. But what we found our customers were like, when SolarWinds happened, like it was kind of like a drop everything type scenario, because for yourself you can scan for things, you can understand like, are we impacted, yes or no, you can get that answer. But what about the hundreds of third parties that you utilize that have the same potential vulnerability? And again, this is where I'm thinking a lot about, is like those situations keep happening and very, very frequent. How can technology be a part of solving that? So at BitSight, what I'm building is this concept of like, hey, if you tell me who your third parties are, I'm going to do my best to figure out if they're running a particular piece of software. So 3CX is a good example. We can tell you like, hey, out of your 100, these 20 are running that piece of technology. Let them know that exploit is in the wild. Let them know that they got to take action and communicate back and forth. So like, those are the things that we're thinking about solving technology for our customers around this particular topic. Anything else we have on this, John?
Yeah, I mean, maybe moving from the technology perspective, if I didn't mention in the intro, I'm more in the risk management space at this part of my career than the hands-on keyboard. So I'm not finding and remediating 0 days. I'm not patching systems. I'm more from the programming risk management perspective. But pulling it up a little bit, as third-party dependencies continue to grow and organizations decide to buy more versus build less, the reality is we're just blending or extending our IT areas across different parts of the internet. So the accountabilities for the organization around managing risk don't change depending on how many different third parties that you work with. And our risks that we need to manage for our customers do not shift to those third parties as well. So we need to treat our third parties just like we would secure ourselves and use the proper controls to protect our environments.
Yeah, all right. So how did it work? Actually, yeah, so a lot of people ask me, what is 0 day? What was even named as 0 day? Like the name comes from the fact that once it happens, like once it's known, you've had 0 days to patch it. That's where the name comes from. So like a yellow box around it, like, hey, I'm aware, like I've had 0 days to fix it, and like, that's what we call the window of vulnerability. But go back to the beginning, right? Attackers discover vulnerability. Right, so the 3CX, I think, is going to be North Korea. They're saying that that's where it's coming from. But there are a lot of folks, a lot of places are constantly probing and looking for different vulnerabilities. Just like the rebels did on the Death Star, right? How do we blow this thing up? Like, you're constantly looking and searching for it. And once they find it, then they start creating, the exploit. Like, so that's, I said like the torpedo, but some way to get in and exploit those systems. And that's the second step. Now, it's not always like the folks that create exploit don't always execute them, because actually it's very, it's very dangerous to do. Again, if you're doing it from the U.S., again, you're going to go to jail. Like, so, like, what they actually do instead, like you'll see in the black market, you can buy exploits, and depending on how good they are, you can get like $1 to $2 million. I think the highest one that supposedly was sold was like $10 million exploit. So again, there's a lot of money to be made to find these things and then sell them on the black market. And then, of course, like, somebody buys it, and that's what they do. they'd launch an attack, right? So that could be ransomware or whatever, right? Depending on what it is. 3CX looks like it's like data exfiltration, like your passwords in your Chrome browser, those are going to come out. So that's really, again, the attacks launch, people start noticing it. Again, that's the awareness. And that's really, again, where 3CX is today, right? So on Wednesday, it was known. They got to build a patch. A patch doesn't exist, right? And that takes a while. It's got to go through and make sure that it's not creating further vulnerabilities and whatnot. But so that takes a while. Then they got to distribute the patch, right? That is also not that easy. Like they have 600,000 customers. Like that means that 600,000 companies, like each one of them have to install that patch. It's not automatic. Like think about your Mac or Windows machine. It's not even like that's not even automatic. It just happens. Like someone has to take action. So they distribute that patch, and then once that's done and everyone's defended, like okay, now we're done. Now we've kind of wrapped a nice bow around it. But the truth is that even like known CISA exploits are still out there. Like they're still out there today. People don't patch for whatever reason. They're just unaware. And this will go again to some of the Mandalorian tenets. We'll go to a little bit next. But that's kind of the general basics of like the 0 day from beginning to end, how it works. And again, a lot of these are popping up. So, all right. So, how can the Mandalorian principles help you protect organizations? So again, it's gonna be a stretch. And don't take them literally because then you'll do a lot of odd things. So, next slide. So the first one, actually, of the code of honor is wearing armor. And I kind of scratched my head when I saw this one. Like, really? That's the first one? Like, to wear something? But I thought about, my own family. So the Norremo family, like, we have a very similar first code, which ours was like, to my kids, like 9 and 12. When they were small, we really struggled with this, and that was like, wear your underwear. Every day you gotta wear your underwear. Hey, you get an underwear check. So that was always like, again, so I kind of get it, like there was a need for this. But wearing your armor, like, I liken that to the cybersecurity, but again, how are you protecting yourself? Again, as he went on and further, he kept building up his armor, right? So that's, again, in terms of wearing your armor, for companies, we also have to wear our armor. We can't just turn a blind eye. We got to start protecting ourselves and adding like layering things in. Now, John, did you have anything to say there?
Yeah, for each of these principles or the elements of the code of honor, I'm hopeful that I can just provide some perspectives of what I've learned throughout my career. So, when we talk about security best practices, it's not that simple to just go and take a list and a framework and be able to implement all those controls. So only you and your organizations will know what the best security best practices are for you and based on the industry. Oftentimes, security best practices or the ability to implement those best practices, you'll be dependent on other groups in the organization, whether it's IT groups, human resources, legal, procurement. So just some examples of where security can't do it on their own. A best practice, if someone is being terminated in the organization, would be timely revocation of access. So where does that start? You start with the manager, and then the HR, and then hopefully at some point early on, within the first few minutes, security gets involved. So once again, best practice is timely revocation, but it's not something that security can drive or start with. Another good example, we're talking about 0-day vulnerabilities. How about vulnerability management? We talked earlier about Log4j. Well, if you don't have good practices around asset management, you won't be able to find where those assets are, where you need to manage the vulnerabilities. Security typically isn't responsible for asset management. You're looking at other groups within information technology. And the last example around third-party risk management or cyber risk management. Oftentimes, third-party cyber risk management or third-party risk management is an afterthought when procuring goods or services. So building a relationship with your legal group who's writing or approving contracts and your procurement group that's working with the business owners to buy that software, to buy those goods, to buy those services, is where you want to embed your processes. So it's a correlated effort. Some other things, often organizations may have regulatory compliance, and sometimes that's the only best practice that you are able to implement throughout the organization based on any number of reasons. Some examples there. So maybe you're struggling to secure the rest of your environment, but you have cardholder data. Well, tools that are used to secure PCI zones could be extended if you're creative enough. You could have network segmentation used for other areas of your environment. You could use encryption for other areas of your environment as well. Another example, so tools used to log, monitor, and report on malicious logging attempts for critical infrastructure. Why not extend that to your other secure areas as well? And in some of the previous organizations I worked in, the focus was very heavy in regulations. So where you're getting funding, budget, awareness around being compliant, see if you can maximize that into your other areas as well, or at least extend those technologies. Mentioned before some of the partnerships, but your ability to deploy some of the best practices that you choose will only go as far as your ability to build out those relationships with information technology, HR, legal and procurement. There's opportunities, once you've selected some sort of framework to perform a self-assessment. One of the most popular ones is this cybersecurity framework. You can perform a self-assessment. You can get a baseline for where your organization is at. And that'll be helpful for you as you look to secure funds for today's problems or in the future as you continue to grow to show how you're progressing against a cybersecurity framework.
All right.
Next slide.
So, a couple interesting stats here, right? So you see ransomware on the left, so again the star shooting up to the right. So again, it's about the breaches between over time. You can see it's going way up. And I bet when this comes around, the next report, it will be even higher. And if you think about it, it's changed a lot. When I started Third Party Trust 7 years ago, there was a lot of focus on primarily credit cards, but also some healthcare records, and that's what people really wanted, right? They wanted it so they can reuse it. But the ransomware, it's a little different because, so John, you have 4 kids. Imagine if someone ransomware your pictures of your kids as babies. You really, really care about it. You want to pay a lot of money to get that back. The same thing extends into the enterprise. So what you're seeing is I don't even care what I throw the ransomware around, what I lock down. It could be, again, the accounting files. It could be anything. Without that, companies really struggle now to run things manually. So we've seen in some hospitals to go back to manual processes, meaning paperwork. It's really, really difficult, and I think there was one instance of a person, not making it because, that happening. So bottom line with ransomware, they can just encrypt whatever files they want. They don't have to be the crown jewels necessarily. If it's operationally impacting the business, there's a lot of money to be made. Right? And if they don't have backups or whatnot, a lot of people choose to pay. Right? It's an easy choice. Right? You just do cost-benefit analysis, and it's a very easy choice to decide to pay. So that's one side, right there. Another side, what Manny is doing is tracking the increase in 0 days over time. Right? So it's not quite just up to the right, but the last year right there that they measured, 2021, again, it was the highest by far. Right? And this is kind of the nature of the beast, if you will. The more and more third parties that are being, the more and more technologies being utilized inside the enterprise, the more and more exploits you're going to have. So that is just kind of the nature of it. Okay. And then in another graph, we'll kind of cover this, which is just where are those 80-ish coming from? You'll kind of be surprised, but we'll get to that a little bit. All right, the second tenet is speaking the language, right? So, again, internally, how do we talk about cybersecurity? Again, it's not just one team, it's not just the cyber team or the IT team. It really goes top to bottom. Again, nobody's not affected by cyber at this point, right? So how do you speak that across the business? John, you want to add some stuff here?
Love to try. Security has become so broad, with so many technologies, so many different threats, vulnerabilities. It's really hard for me to even keep up these days with the different acronyms and threat groups. We really have to, we always want everyone else to understand security, but how often do we invest the time to understand the business? So we really have to understand what our business does, how money is made within our organizations, and the critical processes that support that to really know where we need to prioritize those protections. We have to understand how security impacts those business processes, from onboarding new employees to provisioning new software, so we can really appreciate the security culture within and the appetite for change. And every organization that's represented in the room here will have a limit of how much security impact that you're willing to tolerate. So you can only go so far. We have to put in the effort to communicate about our security programs when we're not having a crisis or we're not participating in an audit. It was a really easy analogy working at a power utility to equate security. So when you flip a light switch at home and the power goes on, everyone's happy. But when you have a power outage and you flip that light switch and nothing happens, people will tend to be angry with the power company. Well, similar things can be thought about with security. When someone is reading their email and they click on a link to a hopefully valid URL, and they go to a working website, they're happy. But when you put in a control, there's some sort of incident or disruption, and the next time they go to click a link and they can't get to the website, they're going to have a negative lasting thought with the security department. So try to talk about security during happy times. Try to talk about security when there isn't an incident. Try to talk about security when there's an audit. Use examples where your security organization, your IT organization, where you've prevented something, or you've improved a process, or you've reduced or you've increased the efficiencies in existing processes because of what the security department has done. I'll give you another example. At one of my previous organizations, we were very heavy on safety. Being critical infrastructure, people can be severely injured or die based on what your organization does. So we did a lot of training on safety. So you want to look for some of those correlations. So from a safety perspective, we all in this room should avoid distractions when walking downstairs. We shouldn't be looking at our phones. We shouldn't be maybe chewing gum or eating or having things in our hands. We want the same thing when people are reading emails, right? We want to train them to not be distracted or playing Wordle while they're reading emails, which may increase the odds that they're going to click on a malicious link, right? So that's one simple analogy that allows us to speak the language of our organization. We did a lot around safety, so why not talk about cybersecurity from a safety perspective? But bottom line, find creative ways to align the security language to what your organization does, or find someone that can help you do it.
Yeah, and security is also, whether we like it or not, is going to be not an inhibitor, it's going to be an enabler of business. So Gartner had this study by 2025, I think, 63%, I think, I don't know what it was. But anyway, a lot of companies, the number one reason they don't pick to choose to engage with another company, the number one reason, not price, not product, it's going to be, again, their security posture. Why? Because they cannot introduce more risk into the enterprise, right? So in terms of the language, I would say cybersecurity, again, is the enabler of your business that's going to propel it into the next generation for sure. All right, we got the Razor Crest up there. So the first thing is, I forgot to mention the reference, but in episode 2, again, ransomware has been around for a long time, and now we talk about it a lot. But even in episode 2, the job was actually to put ransom on the part, right? They stripped the Razor Crest, and then they held it for ransom. And that was the whole quest around episode 2, was for him to get it back. Now, the Razor Crest here, if you see, again, this is, where do we attribute the 0 days? Out of that report, where are they coming from? And actually, you can tell there's 3 main players here. It kind of makes sense, they're the biggest, but 3 main players. It's Microsoft is number 1, Apple, and Google. They make up 75%. So again, almost all the way up to the right engine, it's just those 3. And again, the threats that are leading to these breaches, according to the Verizon report, again, credentials, phishing, vulnerabilities. So those are the top 3. Now, okay. So the one thing is these 3 providers, I would say if you're using them for identity access management, credentials, right? Email, that's phishing. Another one that's coming up a lot is RDPs, or remote desktop protocols. Any of those 3, across those 3 providers, internally, those are kind of the first things you want to lock down and look at from a 0 day perspective. All right, let's move on to the next tenet. Defend yourself and your family. So
this is very closer to what I think about, but protect members of the supply chain as if they were your own family, right? So like in today's day and age, John mentioned it briefly, but again, the company I started, Third Party Trust, we focused on third-party risk management, right? So that just means I'm engaging another company, I'm giving them access, I'm giving them data. Somehow I'm creating a relationship that's got risk in it, right? You're going to manage that risk over time, and especially when you're seeing a couple of things happening, like compliance around it, meaning government mandating that you manage the risk, so you have compliance risks. But also you have, the sheer volume of third parties. So like 10 years ago, any company you guys are at, like if you ask them, like, compared to the number of third parties you had back then to now, everyone's going to say like we have way more, right? It's gone into every single business unit. Like HR has their own set of third parties, like Workday or whatever, payroll providers. Finance will have their own, like QuickBooks and others. It's kind of everywhere, and that's like just part and parcel of being a modern business. Like if you try to do everything in house, you just can't compete. So again, there's this big push towards like a digital supply chain for operating your business. Okay, so we've seen that go way up, and because of that, you really have to think about your attack surface totally different. It used to be, hey, these are my 4 walls, I'm going to manage it, and I know everything that's going on. Your attack surface is really still that, but it also is your entire extended supply chain. All those third parties that are holding critical data or access, you can't just ignore it. So again, defend yourself and your family. Again, those vendors are really part of your business, they're partners, and that is how you're growing in the enterprise, that is how you're operating and ultimately delivering service. So like the advent of this digital supply chain is like new, and this traditional supply chain has been around for thousands of years at this point. The new one, the digital one, is just kind of cropping up, and it's going very, very fast. So we've got a couple stats on this next. But John, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, everyone in this room working for an organization, nonprofit, for-profit, anything of that sort, we all have different third parties supporting various aspects of our organization with various levels of security maturity. And when I looked at this principle, defending yourself and your family, thinking of a third party as a family, I really struggled to identify a way in which my organization or any organizations in the past have really tried to protect the supplier, because typically you think of the supplier needing to protect against them. But I was able to remember in one of the previous organizations we had a third party with remote access, and as part of our diligence in reviewing the security, we were performing a third party scan. You have a question?
Yeah. So in recent years, so I do databases. I've had a lot of clients who wanted to sell data to their suppliers as a way of providing additional value. So the suppliers will buy data about their sales, especially if they're a distributor. And it seems like what you're describing is that there's a security risk associated with doing that. Do you have any thoughts on how an organization would decide whether selling data to their suppliers is worth the risk of their suppliers then having that data?
I could jump in.
Let me just define the terms here. So again, this is a great example. Like in that case where you're like he's asking, like, hey, we want to sell data to a supplier. Really, like I would turn on the head and say that they're a customer of yours then. But you're selling them data, and you want to make sure that that data that you sold them, that they don't repurpose in the ways they shouldn't, or they're not breaching, it goes out, because that could be a lot of the value. That's actually why we call it third-party risk management, not vendor risk management, because in that scenario, they're not a vendor to you. So it's vendor risk management, it's a bit of a misnomer. So third-party risk management is a little bit better, because again, they're just a third party too, and you have a relationship with that third party, and there's some amount of risk that you are creating as part of that engagement.
Yeah,
so go ahead, John.
maybe dive a little bit into the data itself, really evaluating what's the sensitivity of it, and who really owns that data or that information. If it was created by your organization and it's important to you, then you have 100% of the risk to manage as you sell it to your customers and understand how they may then turn around and use that information for their own needs. But if you're an organization where that information or data belongs to humans or other customers, then you have a duty to those customers to evaluate the sensitivity and the protection needed. and probably the notification and agreement before you can distribute that to other organizations for other purposes.
Yeah, we've seen this too. Pretty common in healthcare. So what they end up doing is a research agreement. So like, they're definitely not a vendor, but you're doing some sort of research agreement with another hospital system, for example, right? But you can't just take your patient's data and like willy-nilly share it with that other system. Like, you own that data, so you own the responsibility, and that responsibility extends to you if you share it with a third party, right? So like, that's where actually security needs to be brought in, because you've got to make sure that the controls that research partner of yours has is good enough, or again, that it meets your minimum baseline criteria. Otherwise, you should not be engaging in business. It doesn't matter if it can cure cancer. Like, first and foremost, it's going to be patient safety and security first, and then later, there's going to be other partners that do it. Or, my point on this slide is also going to be, has always been, large organizations like John's and others kind of has like this obligation, like when it comes to protecting your family, like you want to share knowledge, right? You're going to work with your partners, like you want to tell them, like, so again, for us, what we try to do at Bitsent, again, we will identify, like we'll tell you, hey, this third party has this 3CX vulnerability, for example. Click a button and immediately tell them like which IP it lives on, what the evidence is, and communicate with them that it's happened, and ask them for remediation to communicate back. That's an example of like our customers, which tend to be larger enterprises, leveraging this technology and providing service to their family, to their supply chain, and helping them out. Right? And it's always, like I felt, it's always been incumbent on larger companies to help third parties, like act as like, when you're engaging with those, like when you look for that security posture, you're doing it in a consultative and like a partnership way. Right? It's like, hey, these are the 3 key gaps that we see that you can really level up your security if you close these 3, whatever it might be, right? But it's, again, the relationship is there, it happens every single day, and that's, again, the family is extended. So again, if you have a big company and you're running like an information security like office, help your suppliers become more secure, because that ultimately is going to help you also in the long term.
Yeah, I wanted to jump back into my example, but first, thank you for the question. So we had a third party that had remote access to our organization, and as part of our diligence, we performed a vulnerability scan. This is something that they had never done before. Obviously, we were doing it to understand what the potential likelihood of some sort of breach happening within that organization and then extending into our organization. And it was an appreciation for them to understand the harm that they could provide to our organization and not only some of their other customers. So we were able to come to a mutual agreement within the legal contract that we would perform a scan monthly, and had established service level agreements on timely resolution of the vulnerabilities we found. And this ended up being a win-win situation for both sides. Our organization had a higher level of trust in having that connectivity to that third party, and the vendor had a higher level of security, assuming they were fixing the things that were found, which decreased the odds of disruption happening and impacting our organization and many other customers. Now, this was a very small organization. They weren't a technology organization. They were performing other services. So on the flip side, your larger software as a service organizations may be quite the opposite. Less willing, right? Less willing to budge from a contractual agreement. Their security may even be more mature than yours. But because they have a higher bargaining power in the situation, right? They're a giant, they're a behemoth, and maybe your revenue doesn't affect them that much, and they're not willing to change how they affect other customers. It really means that while this is talking about defending yourself and your family, sometimes you have to defend yourself from your family as well, right? Treating any of those connections as a hostile network, because you'll never have the visibility into those third parties that you would if that system was installed within your environment. From a risk versus business perspective, all of our organizations have business decisions to make when they're procuring software. And oftentimes, the perceived business value of whatever is being purchased may outweigh the security risk exposure that you're able to, or maybe sometimes not able to, explain as part of that diligence process. But kind of collectively, from what Anders was talking about, it doesn't mean that we can't, as a group, continue to push our third parties to do more, put that pressure on them in our due diligence processes, help them be better from a security perspective. by increasing their own security investments, and all the way, even for them to increase how they provide breach notifications.
I think we have a question right here. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, so it's very difficult, and a lot of companies struggle because there's two things that change. One is the impact that third party has on you. That changes over time. So we have examples where you engage a marketing company, they're going to build a website. Next thing you know, they're building some sort of solution that's got login on it, and you got 500 users. That's an example of like the impact of that particular third party has changed dramatically. So that's changing over time. That goes up and down. The other piece is like, security posture, that changes. So, we talk a lot about continuous monitoring, right? So you can't just do it point in time. That's good, because you can't deep dive every day. But the idea is like some sort of cadence, risk-based cadence, you deep dive. So again, you really go and check different controls, and you try to make it as narrow as controls that matter. You can't scatter shot, but you got to do that. Then you do it continuously. So again, if it's a 0 day, that's a good example. That's indigenous. What do you do then? You need some sort of way of managing that risk. And then you reassess on some sort of cadence, so maybe a year later, or 6 months, or 2 to 3 years, right? But the first step, in the maturity curve, is to inventory third parties. Who are they? You'll be surprised that not many folks know that. The second thing would be okay, which one's the most impactful, right? So I have some way of measuring that. It's going to be critical, so you can rank from top to bottom. Then after that, it's okay, what's your security posture? Okay, now in this framework, it's impact times likelihood equals risk, right? So the magic numbers to figure that out, right? You get an idea around risk. And then you start doing that more regularly. At some point, at the top end of the maturity curve, you're continuously looking for this data. But you're also I built a pretty cool integration with Netscope, where what we did is we're looking at network traffic, and we're saying hey, what are new vendors that our users are going out to and using, right? And it's actually in near real time, telling me it's okay, you have 5 users, 10 or 500 or 5,000, and it's measuring that over time, so you get the impact going up or down. Your network traffic can actually do that. This is only for SaaS vendors, really, but again, those are the majority at this point. So that's one thing, and then BitSight has done this for a long time, scanning constantly, looking at different assets and vulnerabilities, and patching. Are they patching the servers? Are they utilizing encryption? Are they doing this, that, or the other? That's on the security side. So, bottom line, this is a tough problem, but when John was at ATC, you have mandates now through NERC. You got to do it. It's got to be scrutiny. If you're in finance or insurance, NYDFS has got very strict rules around you have to do this process, and they're pretty litigious. There's a lot of fines coming out of that. But even at DFARS, again, it goes on and on. We're seeing this everywhere. So companies are struggling. And again, it's a combination of people, processes, and tooling that needs to be placed together. So I think I answered it. John, any other comments on that? I think you covered it pretty well. Cool. We have about 15 minutes. Okay, so we'll speed it up a little bit. I love that little icon. I got a designer down in Argentina that drew that right here. So half of the reward is covered here. That means that the majority of breaches that are happening is because of due to a third party. It kind of makes sense. Like I said, the attack surface, it's getting so blended. It used to be very clear, my stuff, a third party, and you'd be able to put very boundaries on it and put it into lists of buckets. It's getting very, extremely blended right now. Great. So the more third parties you have, the more of them will be attributed to a third party breach, right? Just like here. So we're seeing this is one of the pressures on doing third-party risk management in a much more meaningful way in companies across not just highly regulated industries, but others also. All right.
raise your children as Mandos, right? So let's talk a little bit about education here, John.
Yeah, Anders, if you want to come back to the stats later, that's fine. When I was thinking about this, oftentimes, when organizations carve out a business function called cybersecurity, that puts it unintentional, maybe an indirect, accountability that's the only group that will perform security for the organization. Now, not by any means am I talking about we should eliminate security departments, but we need to find how each organization can find the way to approach security as a shared responsibility. So I have some experience around security awareness from a couple of different organizations, so I wanted to share kind of like the very large versus the very small and where we had some success. So the first stop I had in my career was for a Fortune 75 at the time, a multinational organization. Somehow I was the second ever security hire. The company didn't have policies and procedures, so really no basis of which to train the employees around the security behaviors necessary. There's no security awareness program. There were no regulatory requirements around security or security awareness. So the only opportunity we really had was to utilize IT staff at various business units, operating companies throughout the world to spread the different awareness that we need from a security perspective. So stop number two, quite the opposite, a very small organization based mainly here in Wisconsin, around 5 physical locations, much different experience, to the point that we had created competition among senior leaders around phishing scores and our phishing awareness program. We are able to tie our phishing program to employee annual compensation. So not only our monthly tests, as well as, did anything real happen? And maybe Mike in the audience will let me know how that's been going since I've left. But that company also had really, really strong security, cyber and physical oversight, which, from the top down, making sure that we didn't have any regulatory incidents really helped spread that message from a security perspective. And now where I'm at today, my FAM is around Fortune 250 organization. I'm not directly involved in the security awareness program, so I just wanted to share what I thought was pretty neat. That local access for the previous company, being able to visit all the offices, being able to do presentations, being able to see everyone face to face, that's super hard to scale when you have 10,000 plus employees across a dozen or so locations throughout the U.S. So I like what the team at AmFam did is they created an ambassador program. So they recruited people that were curious, people that were asking questions or were interested in security, and used things like Microsoft Teams and Yammer and periodic meetings to just have conversations around, here's what our employees need to know. Can you help us amplify it in your local culture? So maybe a different business unit, operating company, different locations throughout the U.S., and really use dozens of people to get that high touch or that personal touch throughout the organization. But regardless of the size of your organization, so like I said, I gave kind of both ends of the spectrum. Our employees that are working within your organizations are more in the know about security concerns than ever before. So take advantage of that curiosity. Train them, be available to them, and let them amplify your message, how they would do it within their local culture. But also find the person or the group within your organization that knows how to communicate, that is able to effectively share messages and change the organization and partner with them. We don't have to be the best communicators. Sometimes we just need to find the right person to do it for us. And then no matter what, connect with your audience in a way that helps them secure their personal lives. It's something that I feel was very successful in our previous organization, where if we told them how to secure their home PCs and their online accounts and their identities, I think naturally there was like a dividend or a correlation to them being able to understand how to protect things within their organization, whether they are there today or at another organization in the future.
Yeah, and the stat here kind of stands out, and I'm so glad that we no longer do this, which is like, I haven't heard it for a little bit. And if you hear it, just like point and shout at people that do it, but people that say like, oh, our weakest link is our people. Like, people don't like to say that anymore, thank God. But here's the stat, right? 82 breaches. Well, there will be some involvement. That could be someone clicking on a phishing like email, or again putting their credential, or by accident installing something. There's a bunch of different ways, but
vast majority of breaches, like, again, there's some sort of human element. And for me, it's like, yeah, raising cyber savvy, fine, but it's also incumbent on companies to build systems. Like, this is not really going to change, right? So you can do a lot of things, like one is trading, but you got to build systems that, you know, again, account for this, right? Those guardrails have to be in place. Like, it's up to you. It's not like you can't just point at the user to say, hey, like, it's your fault. It's like, no. Like, what are you going to do? Fire everyone and get rid of them, and then you don't have a company. Like, that, your employees are your company. So, again, that's the most critical asset that you have is the people, not the weakest link, right? But this is the stack. So again, the takeaway is more for me. Let's focus on building systems. So anyone that's involved in setting up email providers or IT support or again, you name it, you got to build in the guardrails to protect from these different events. Like that's on you, not on your end user. Don't expect them to be acting perfect every single day. It's impossible. Even I click on phishing emails, something like by accident, right? Everyone does it. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Two more. Okay. So yeah, so contributing to the client's welfare, again, that's, you know, shout out to Mike for putting this together. Events like these are really, really important. But again, help others. Like, I think about ways like the BitSite, like how can we crowdsource this data across the customer base? How do we actually bring customers together to solve these problems? Everyone in this silo is really difficult to solve some of these things, but the more and more like you can work hand in hand, the better it's going to be. Mando's a good example. Like, he never, not a single mission did go alone, right? He always had friends. Like, so this one is Bo-Katan, right? I think. So anyway, but every mission, if you actually look, every episode, he never really went at it alone. Okay, next slide.
I wanted to bring kind of an internal and external perspective to this. So internally to your organization, I'd like to think, knowing some of the people in this room, most of us grew up in a non-security role or two, or discipline. So not only can you provide someone in your organization knowledge of that discipline, but now you know how to do it better from any security perspective. So right away, we talked a couple of times about how you need to build partnerships. So outside of technical knowledge, we really rely heavily on some of these other departments to make security work. So what's one way that you can lend a hand to human resources and legal, and then cash in that favor in the future when you need something from them from a security perspective. And then externally, referencing what Anders was talking about, sometimes it's just as easy as getting involved in a conversation at a security conference like this, or a local user group, and ask questions, or give answers, right? Give back to the community. And it's largely digital now as well, through social media and LinkedIn. You may have something to offer that you didn't expect, or a connection that you can make. And don't be afraid to be the one asking as well. There's really so much to learn in this space that we can't be an expert at everything. And if you're asking the question, someone else probably also has that question that they'd be curious about as well. Or, have a friend volunteer you to speak at a conference for the first time in your career on your birthday. And maybe that's how I'm contributing back to the clan today myself. So.
It was more arm twisting, but happy birthday. Let's look at these stats. So this is actually like how many minutes per year are companies like training their employees. So like this gives you an idea. Like, I don't know where your company ends up being, but like, roughly again, it's in the 1 to 2 hours. I think there's a lot more there, and again, it's becoming more mature. But yeah, this is the distribution, but you're still seeing a lot of folks on the left, zero cyber awareness training. Like, that is just not going to be sustainable, because eventually that's going to lead to bad outcomes, which will hurt revenues of companies, etc. So awareness is our best weapon. Build the most comprehensive protection possible, right? And that's, again, the network is your people and technology process, all the combined.
And maybe specific to phishing awareness, oftentimes that training will just focus on not clicking. But wouldn't we really like all of our employees to report malicious emails so we have that early insight? The quicker that first employee can report something, the quicker that our response teams, our technologists can take a look at that and have kind of that early warning system. And at one organization, we built up such a good awareness with our employees that they were reporting way too much for analysts to handle. So we were actually able to implement software that would help sift through some of those reports and then integrate with our email system so that we can pull out no malicious emails so that we could avoid incident, so that we could earn the higher bonus that I talked about before. And it really reduced time to analyze and became more efficient. All right, last principle.
Yeah. The last one is to rally to the cause. There we go. There we go. All right. So when called upon, you got to rally to the cause, right? So cybersecurity is not just like in one department. It's really, again, top to bottom. Everyone's got to really, really work on it, right? Everyone's got a part to play, like we say here. And if you remember in season one, it's really when the clan came, even though it was kind of on the outs with them, they came and saved them. So again, it's everyone's job. So John, how have you seen that implemented?
Yeah, I mean, I really see security as a team sport. An organization isn't going to be successful if the security department's the only one doing security, right? We need to be able to spread some of that awareness and responsibilities throughout. And that goes from senior leadership, that's securing budget and prioritizing security work, all the way down to each employee that's staying vigilant. Everyone has an important role to play. And then given the high demand for cybersecurity resources, organizations can find opportunities to cross-train to really spread that wealth out. From my perspective, when every role in an organization can impact that organization from a security perspective, we owe it to them to train and provide the tools necessary to do the work.
I'll cover this real quick. So acting fast is important. It's kind of interesting, actually, the time to breach on average is going way down, but that's because the attackers they tell you immediately, hey, we've infiltrated, we ransomware you, right? Give us money. But even if you take that out, so if you take all the non-actor disclosure, meaning like they told you, it's still going so actually way more measured in days or less, where it used to be months or more. So we are seeing companies are much more vigilant, and again, there's much more maturity around detecting these things automatically and trying to patch them. So next slide. So yeah, so we're getting very close to the end, and this is kind of one of the takeaways here. It's like, with the Star Wars reference, of course, which is like it only takes one precise shot in a weak spot. So we got to all work on closing our gaps, and you do that in a variety of ways. To summarize some of these things, right? Having a multi-layered defense, like so defense in depth is important. Like how do you protect in 0 days? Like it's patching, yes, of course. Like, but it's also you can actually stop things at the firewall. You can also do your own like threat scanning and whatnot. So again, multi-layered defense in depth is important. I'll highlight the third purpose management again. Your attack surfaces extends to your third parties, and every day like more and more to your third parties than it previously did. Continuously look for these things because they are going to be popping up on a semi-regular basis as we move forward. Be selfless, knowledge share, help your peers, help your folks around you. And then the last is like the quicker you can detect it, the more you can protect against it, minimize the damage. All right. Last, we have a quick poll, right? And it's like, who would be the best cyber warrior? Show of hands. We got 4 options up here: Mando, Wheel, Brief, Karga, and Mothwood. So, show of hands. Like, who would go for Mando? All right, we don't have anyone for Mando. All right, what about Wheel?
No.
All right, the second one's Wheel, and then third is Moff Gideon. Oh, sorry. Brief, Karga. We got a couple for that, yeah. And then Moff Gideon. So who's going for the bad guy? All right, we have a few for the bad guy. Awesome. All right, let's see if we can get it. All right.
I'm not getting any signal from you guys right now.
That was it.
All right, thanks everyone. We really appreciate the time. Love being here.